Okay, everybody, is the sound a bit... Okay, so I'm going to monitor the Slack channel from Adrian. Are the panelists ready in New York? Can we hear from New York? I want to see Douglas and Kyunghyun Cho. Hi, guys.
Yeah, we're here, but we seem to be in the dark. Is that?
Yeah, you're in the dark. Turn up the lights there, guys.
Maybe we shouldn't have worn black shirts.
Or maybe that's intentional, you know? Yeah.
I thought the people who are dressed in black were supposed to be in Paris.
That's a French
which
joke
Slack,
that I
which
don't
Slack channel
understand.
should I look at?
There is a question and answer, and Simon should
Okay.
create
And if there's any, yeah.
and you can ask him to give you a Slack question.
Okay, so, yeah. So we're at 6 o'clock and we have a pretty pretty stringent constraint on time, so let's get started. Can you guys put up the light a bit there in New York, because you're very, very dark? If not, it's okay. Okay, so just to start, raise your hand in the audience if you've got a ChatGPT subscription. I was just wondering how many people here have got a subscription to ChatGPT Plus. It's about 20%, okay. Okay, so let's get started. Maybe we should just introduce ourselves because not everybody might know everyone. My name is Henry John McCracken. I'm an astronomer here at EAP, and I'm working on large surveys, galaxies and dark matter. I think that's the best way of saying it. And Licia?
Hello, I'm Licia Verde.
Mike, you're muted.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Licia Verde. I'm a cosmologist from Instituto Ciencia del Cosmos from Barcelona. And I do large-scale structure, but I also have expertise in publishing as co-scientific director of JCAP, and having been advising Archive for a few years.
Hello everyone, I'm Pierre Casenove and I feel like I'm being the black sheep here. I'm an engineer and a project manager. So it's a lot for one guy, and I'm from a space agency. So maybe I will have some answers that are a bit different from the others. But yeah, I'm the French project manager of the Euclid mission. And yeah, I'm gonna have some in charge of all the processing.
New York, please go ahead.
Douglas Scott, I'm a cosmologist from Vancouver, University of British Columbia, and I'm not an expert on large language models. I'm not quite sure why I'm here, except that I sometimes
You know why you're there, Douglas?
Yeah.
Hi, Kyunghyun. So I'm a professor of computer science and data science at New York University. I also work as a senior director of frontier research at Prescient Design, which is part of the Genentech. And Genentech, if you're unaware, it was actually the first biotech that was founded in late 70s. And then, works a lot on this kind of coming up with the protein therapeutics for the various diseases. I have been working with language models ever since like 2013 or 12. So I guess I was invited because I might be the only one who actually trained them more than, let's say, 5 years at a time in the world at the moment, yes. All right.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm glad we have one real expert.
Actually a trainer.
Yeah. Yeah, so just in case anyone was wondering, I didn't use ChatGPT at all in anything that I'm about to say. I'm very happy to write everything in my own words. So this is the last debate of the conference. And actually it's interesting because I think we're going to bring together a lot of the themes that we've discussed in the two previous debates, namely, and those were the debates that we also had last time we organized the conference, where we had 5 different debates. And so the interesting thing now is with the arrival of the large language models on the scene, suddenly millions of people, there's 100 million subscribers on ChatGPT, are actually being faced with these issues that we discussed 2 years ago. The field has exploded, and a lot of people have become exposed to generative AI and chat models. And so it's interesting, language encodes information. That's how it evolved over millennia. And the models have been trained with enormous amounts of data culled over the internet. And they've been very good at a lot of the language-related activities like summarizing content or translation, And the last generation of models, configured as chatbots, can answer a very wide variety of questions and sound quite convincing even when they're completely wrong. And does that sound like any of our colleagues? That's the easy joke to make. And who was it said about astronomers, often in error, never in doubt? It's sort of the experience of using ChatGPT when he often insists of a truth which is completely wrong. Okay, so and the interesting thing as well is that the models, in a way in which nobody is really sure, they're actually capable of some kind of reasoning, this emergent behavior, and they can correctly answer questions about half of the time maybe, about questions about bricks falling on the moon and this kind of stuff, the difference between a kilo of bricks and a kilo of feathers falling on the moon. So, but anyway, we're not going to get into the philosophical debate about whether or not the models are intelligent. There's plenty of stuff on the internet about that. The thing that we want to discuss here is really how the adoption of those kinds of models is going to affect astronomy, is going to affect research and our field itself in astronomy. And I kind of liked what Ted Chiang characterized the large language models as a blurry JPEG of the web. In other words, it was a low resolution encoding of a lot of human knowledge. I don't think that the large language models represents the player piano moment of astronomers. This is just a reference to the story, you know, in the 1900s where all the people who made player pianos were out of business with the invention of the phonograph, which of course led to lots of new jobs and things like broadcasting and radio. But I think it's the first time in human history where intellectual labor or some amount of intellectual labor is going to be affected by the arrival of machines. And of course, there's the questions that maybe we'll address is what's the nature of these models and how the fact that most of them are not open, we don't have any information even on some cases like in ChatGPT, what the nature of the training set is. And there are open source models, maybe we'll discuss that. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff to talk about and I'm going to try to be on time, but there are four big questions I think we should try to discuss or at least give our opinion so we can see how much we agree. And the four questions that I want to address is, first of all, the role of large language models in scientific communication and in writing, which is a subject which is really very relevant. The second question, which I hope we can address, is what skills will be required for scientists in the future? Will it still be the same? What is the impact of these models on training and education? The third thing is what's going to be the impact of large language models in scientific collaborations, especially in large collaborations like Euclid. And the last one, which is looking a bit further forward, is what will be the future of research itself with large language models. I don't know if the panel want to comment on those four questions. I think we can maybe go on right away to the first question. So what I propose to do is I'll give my little 1 minute spiel, and then I'll go to each panel member, first in Paris and then in New York. And then we'll invite the panelists to respond, and then we'll take questions from Slack or from the audience. Sorry, from the audience and then from Slack. So the first question we'll try to address is, what's the impact of large language models on scientific writing and research? So everybody's heard about the Hollywood writers' strike. They essentially went on strike because they're worried about certain low-level tasks being taken away by computers. And I quite like the comment from the author of *Sapiens*, who claims that that AI has hacked the operating system of human civilization, which is obviously, if you're a writer and you want to sell books, you try to over-dramatize things. But essentially, that's because humans started out by telling stories to each other around the campfires. And so what happens now in academic publishing? How should we use these tools to communicate information? How do we cite them? Can you trust their outputs? And will they produce unreliable output? ChatGPT is definitely not just like a word processor. How should the use of these tools be controlled, if at all?
Okay,
Licia.
so 1 minute only. So
yeah, so we have roughly 15 minutes between the four of us for each topic, but we'll see how it goes.
So So as you can imagine, when ChatGPT was released, there was a huge influx of ChatGPT written papers that were trying to be pushed into repositories or into journals. They were not of high quality, obviously, but it made the problem obvious that this machine-generated papers were different from the previous one. For example, some author tried to put ChatGPT as the author also. And of course, the machine cannot be an author because it cannot take responsibility for anything that has been written there, so it can't be an author. There were discussions about using ChatGPT to do referee report, and there were tests done where the referee report written by the machine is much more pleasant to the author and also has much more consistency rather than the human referee report. But I'm sure as an author you would prefer to have a scientist doing the referee report of your papers. Some journals and some publishers try to, and are still insisting into prohibiting the use of large language model in manuscripts submitted for publication. This is probably not enforceable because there are different levels of use of ChatGPT. You can use it to correct your language, especially if you are not, if English is not your first language, all the way to actually write the entire introduction or write the conclusions. Of course, now, a year later, it's clear that there are questions about plagiarism. But at the beginning, it was not obvious to most of the authors, and so they were just using it. And then the author needs to know that the author is responsible for whatever gets submitted. So if there is some sentence that has been copied without attribution from somewhere, the responsible is the author itself. So I think this message has now gone out, and it's clear. There is still the issue of plagiarism, as there was anyway the issue of plagiarism before. And I think there are a lot of more positive views. So this ChatGPT that can write an entire paper is probably the more flashy, but the least useful use. There are many other more use that are more useful and constructive, but where the human is always in the driver's seat and uses this model as a tool, especially if combined with something else. We have been mentioned the example of Astronomy, for example. And so this is used for taming the fire hose. We know that there's a lot of information being published and being released every day in terms of articles, and doing literature review and doing summarization. It's not impossible, but it takes a lot of time to do. And if the machine can help, that will free up time for actually do something that it's more of value, or at least the machine can't do, and therefore start being more of value. Let me stop here and then...
Just a comment. Do you think that ChatGPT could replace the language editor on certain journals? I mean, obviously I have a bias because although people might not think it, English is my first language, but I can understand that, for those who don't speak English as a first language, tools like ChatGPT could be useful in order to correct the manuscript.
So journals are not using that, as far as I know. The journal I'm involved with doesn't use that. There are other tools that are not ChatGPT that do that, like Grammarly, and nobody will complain about using that. So at that point, the level is so low that then you could be doing it with a dictionary or something like Grammarly. So
okay,
it's killing a fly with yeah.
Pierre, would you like to comment, sir? Yeah. So I do use ChatGPT from time to time, and it frees up time. I mean, when I have to write a document, asking him for the structure of the document is totally fine. Asking him for a subchapter is still fine. Going into the details, you are in danger because you end up with bullshit most of the time. And this ChatGPT won't turn me into a brilliant writer, but it saves me time of thinking of what is the structure and so on. The counterpart is that being in a special agency, you are quite regularly reminded to be careful of what you type in an interface that is hosted in the US. No offense for the US people, but I obviously don't type anything that is still inside and restricted to Euclid or to the CNES. And I do love open science and so on, but I think that people should also keep this in mind. Clearly, it helps a lot. Bibliography, matching and checking what's coming up and so on. As I said, slides, great. The structure of a document, super useful, and it frees up time. But I keep being careful on the where is my data coming and going. Maybe it's because I'm a bit too sensitive on this, but yeah, that's it.
Is there an official policy on CNES for the use of these kinds of tools?
Right now, we didn't receive anything except the fact that in any case, we do have regular reminder that we are not allowed to put anything on the cloud or to be careful of what we type on the internet. So, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Would people in New York like to comment? Maybe starting with Douglas, who I know has got a lot of experience looking at Euclid papers and has probably got some comment to make.
I mean, speaking as a member of the editorial board of two large collaborations, we've been discussing this, obviously. And, you know, some people wanted to just ban large language model use, and that seems extreme to most of the rest of us. So we do not know what's going to be the norm in 6 months' time. So it seems crazy to make really, really rigorous rules now. So that's one thing. And then the only other thing we've come up with is if you use it, you have to say you used it, and you have to assure everybody that a human being went over everything afterwards to turn it into a thing that a human, so if you want to use it in an intermediate step, that's fine. However, you know, my job is, well, the usual joke is my job is half teaching, half administration, and the other half is research, right? So I spend a lot of time thinking about how to instruct students as a university professor. And the discussion about how it's used in universities by students is completely dwarfs for me the current research discussion, but they're completely interrelated. And the big thing that's come out there, I've been in several discussion groups in my university, I'm sure they're happening at every university. So we're all trying to figure out how on earth to give homework anymore. And the basic summary of what's going on is there are many positive aspects of large language models. There are lots of good ways of using ChatGPT, but the students are just using it to cheat. And that's basically the bottom line. So as soon as it was available, it was abused. So we have to be very, very aware that people will abuse it, and we need to try to stop that happening in science. And you know, the discussions are wide-ranging over ethics issues, diversity issues. Does it favor people that can afford ChatGPT 4? Does it discriminate against ESL students, even though it sounds like it? You know, even though it sounds like a good tool for somebody who has English as a second language, it turns out that the testing tools for figuring out whether your assignment was done by ChatGPT are much more effective if you're an ESL student. So it actually potentially picks on people whose first language is
ESL is
so there's a whole bunch.
English is a second language, just for people who don't know.
Sorry, English is a second language, yeah. So there's lots of very complicated issues that in universities we're trying to struggle with. And just to give you, you know, a couple of anecdotes. So one of the instructors said, you know, when his students have asked him if they can use ChatGPT for their homework, he's responded to them, can I use ChatGPT to grade all the homework? And the students are quite uncomfortable with that, as they should be. You know, we've had lots of instances of you know, cheating cases, and the university doesn't really know how to cope and so on. So the whole thing is for me, the teaching aspect is is giant compared to the research aspect, but the research aspect will have to follow. But we're broaching all these issues of privacy and ethics and plagiarism and cheating, basically. So that's probably enough for now.
Yeah, I mean, the teaching aspect will come to maybe in the next discussion, because the people who are in schools now will be future researchers. So please go ahead in New York for the next comments.
Well, I mean, all these points are all valid. Although I'm not really that worried about using ChatGPT or whatever these large-scale language models for improving your writing or helping you write anything. At the end of the day, why are we actually putting our names on the papers that we write? Is because we take the responsibility, and then there is an issue of the accountability. So in that sense, yes, language models, ChatGPT, clearly better than the Grammarly. But of course, the Grammarly team is introducing all those language models in the background. So at the end of the day, it's going to be just like having calculator over having to, let's say, do all those arithmetics ourselves by hands. And then we're not too worried about us not being able to do the arithmetics by hands. I mean, I don't think I can do the, let's say, three digit by three digit, let's say, multiplication anymore, right? But then I think what is actually much more worrying when it comes to, let's say, using ChatGPT or whatnot for, let's say, scientific writing, is because scientific writing is a way for us to collectively, let's say, shape how we think and then what kind of directions that we pursue. Now, what do we know about the ChatGPT or the large-scale language models or the training data or the inference data that are actually going behind these models? Essentially, those who are building it and or either explicit or implicitly are shaping the way in which we think. And then that might actually narrow down the scope of our research and also the ability to discover new things down the road. And in particular, this is a scientific community. And in astronomy, as far as I can tell, what you do is to discover something new. Either it can be a law of the universe or some things that we never saw before. But then okay, how do we decide where to look for? And then somehow these language models are going to actually make us all look at the same directions, missing out on a vast amount of the space that we should have actually looked at if we have we not used this kind of thing. So what worries me is about the let's say limitations that are going to be imposed by this ChatGPT and others on our creativity as well as the exploration, rather than write-up, which is more like reporting what we have found so far.
Yeah, that's a very good question, given the fact that because the models are containing knowledge on the internet, can we actually produce new knowledge from these models? So do we have any comments from, first of all, the audience in Paris? Would anyone like to make a comment, or we still have a few more minutes? Nabila?
Yeah, in fact, I wanted to share with you my questioning about the use of ChatGPT for people who are not fluent in English. I mean, you know that, we've been talking about papers, we've been talking about reports, but nowadays research is based on grants. And the grant evaluation is based on a single language, which is English, and which is not accessible in the same manner to everybody, even for people whose English is the first language. And this, in some cases, really helps people who are not completely fluent or at ease with the language in writing their grants, helping them being at a level which is acceptable by committees. And it's really a question. So I mean, I can't judge. I mean, I don't judge it. It's good or it's bad. But there is something which is at least helpful. This is about what we were saying about helping some phrasing or things like that. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just sharing my embarrassment with this use. But anyway.
So I can
Yeah,
comment on
go
that.
ahead, Licia.
So some universities help the researcher to improve their success in grant by offering services of people who are technical but not necessarily scientists to read the text and actually help them shape it in a more intelligible way. But they don't touch the scientific case and they can't touch the science. So if a large language model can play the same role, even for free or with a subscription, there's no much issue there, barring the issue of plagiarism. So you have to be sure that the text is not copied from somewhere, so it will have to be massaged. But that's no different from what we're doing already.
Okay, thanks.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead, Douglas.
I mean, Nabila raises a very good point, and obviously there's some very positive things for people to improve their English, but it's just more complicated than that. So it will bias things in new ways that we need to try to come to terms with. So I mean, it may be that people that can afford the expensive version write better things than people that can't, and that obviously favors people from rich countries or whatever. And as I said, the tools for testing whether you use ChatGPT apparently disfavor people whose first language is English. So it's just complicated, and we're going to have to figure out what the new biases are and try and compensate for them. But it's definitely, the biases are going to change, but it's not going to be unbiased, unfortunately.
Okay. The reviewers are also sometimes English second language, so at some point probably averages out.
Okay, so we had a comment from Fabio Yocco.
Well, yeah, thank you. It was more or less merging what Licia said and was said in New York. It's basically you're creating a different type of income differentiation, because the universities that do have editors or offices that help you edit your proposals are only some universities, not all of them. So there's usually one additional bias and skewing. So this is a tool, and tools are used by people with means. So you're just changing and shifting the difference in income.
Thank you, Fabio. Are there comments from the audience in New York?
Yeah, I think Ashley had a question on Slack.
Sorry, who had a question on Slack?
Oh, sorry, I had a question. It was on the last point that you made. So I guess, and I don't fully even believe my own question, but can't you make the same argument that when we switch from a physical library to Google Scholar, I also have intrinsic biases that are being fed to me through this algorithm? So what's the difference, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. I'll try to repeat the question. In fact, yeah. So I did talk about how using language models or this kind of more recent language models could actually shape collectively how we do science or what kind of things we explore. But then isn't that true already with the Google Scholar? Isn't that true already before with the physical library? Because we would go to the physical library, ask the librarians for the recommendation on the books or the articles that are relevant to some of the topics. So yeah, absolutely. But then of course, the one difference is that there is a difference in the scale at which people can access and the frequency and the repetitions that can be done in terms of the access. So in a sense that these are all the problems that have existed before, this kind of large-scale language models. And also, if you go through the history of the language model started in 1950s by the Claude Shannon. And then that's been used by the IBM ever since the 80s to build a speech recognition system, machine translation systems, whatnot. And then they were indeed built using a lot of resources coming out of the Library of Congress in US, in fact. So in a sense, that's all there, that's all been there. And then this kind of issues of the biases, of course, for instance, in Korea, if you're in a Korean university, to get the English-speaking technical writers, it's going to be so much more expensive. In fact, I would say ChatGPT is lowering the cost significantly to the point that the people can use them so much more readily, right? But then the thing is that when certain technology becomes much more prevalent across the society, then we have to kind of, let's say, rethink about the potential, let's say, side effect or the secondary effects that we did not see when the technology or this kind of, let's say, skill sets were available only at a very limited, let's say, sense, both in time and space. So, I mean, I think, what does it mean? Should we actually slow down the adoption? I don't think that's the answer, because slowing down the adoption artificially will only make us figure out all those issues also more slowly. So I'm not entirely sure what is the right way to go about, but probably slowing down is not the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, the bias present in large language models has already been well documented. We need to be aware of it. Are there any other comments or questions? There's a comment from Guilhem here in Paris.
Yeah, actually, I was wondering, the opposite approach. Let's say that we embrace ChatGPT and feed it with grant proposals, and we discussed about truth in latent space 2 days ago. Can we figure out the truth of grant acceptance with large language models?
One comment I remember reading in Nature, someone said that for response to questions which could be filled out by ChatGPT should no longer be asked. We should only ask on grant applications things which you can't fill out with ChatGPT in order to avoid people from filling them out. Okay, that was quite, someone has put some ChatGPT, Ludo has put some ChatGPT, but I'm not even going to look at it. Okay, so let's move on, I think, until the next question. So it's sort of a related question. In 5, 10, 15 years, are the skills you need to be an astronomer, will they be different? I'm not so sure what the answer to that is. For certain, there are certain things which are hard to do now, which will become easy with the advent of ChatGPT. And there are other things which perhaps the models will never be able to do. Maybe if the panelists could give me some thoughts on what the response to that question is.
Of course, the skills are going to be different because every decade the skill that you need change, and the skill that you needed before we had preprints were different. The skills that we needed when we have to go physically to the libraries were different. The skill that we needed when we were programming in Fortran were different. So, of course, they will be different.
Will it still be as important to be a good, reasonable computer programmer, or at least to know how to program a computer?
What makes a good computer programmer is the algorithm, right? It's not what you write or what you can find.
You will still need to face your problem, imagine, build a solution, and then talk to a prompt or whatsoever will be, maybe it will not be prompt anymore and so on. You will get assisted, but a bad developer doesn't become a genius. As I was saying, that I'm not turning into a great writer just using ChatGPT. I'm far from being it. And so, yeah, there will be new skills, but it won't turn someone into a genius, clearly.
There's a quick reaction from Karim.
But that's the point for lots of tasks. We don't need genius. We just need people who are doing good codes, easy to read, that will work, testable, reproducible, I mean, especially for a space mission. That's what you want. Lots of good, simple, not genius code.
Adrian, you told me there's a question in New York, or did I miss the Slack?
So yeah, that was on the last question, but we can go and do that now, yeah.
Okay, sure.
I think it might spill over to this one as well. So my basic point.
Sorry, please state your name. Please state your name.
Oh, okay. Karthik Iyer, I'm here at Columbia.
Okay.
My basic premise was that while we were talking about ChatGPT as a proxy for all LLMs in how they apply to writing, science communication, and the changing landscape of research, there's also been the advent of a lot more fine-tuned models that are essentially like trained on specific corpuses of text,
sure,
or better suited to specific tasks.
Yeah.
So one thing that I feel is a huge change in how we do research right now is we all write too many papers, like way too many papers, and I for one cannot keep up with them. So the role of tools like this in sort of condensing and giving a larger context window than the human brain is able to accommodate is going to be a key change in how research happens. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
Perhaps I can actually jump in here quickly, sure, because I've been a program chairs of the ICML, NeurIP, Cycler, all those machine learning conferences during the past, let's say, 3-4 years. And then the reason why, and then you had to tell me about writing a lot of papers. I mean, you are in astronomy, right? In computer science and machine learning, you have no idea how many papers there are every day, right? But that one, I think, is not because we didn't have a language model or because our context, let's say, window is small or anything like that, but there's a bit of a perverted incentive structure behind the modern ways in which science is done. So in a sense, having this kind of language models, I think, is only going to help us in a sense that we will feel, as actually was pointed out earlier in several occasions already today, is that some of the obvious things that can be answered perfectly by language models, we will be very, very disincentivized to write about them again. Because if I look at all those, let's say, papers that were, I don't know, there were about 15,000 papers that were written about generative adversarial network during the, let's say, about 2 years after generative adversarial network was proposed in 2015. Now, most of the papers actually share about 50% of the contents. Because of what is the 50% of the content? It's just a description of what generative adversarial network is and so on. And then that's essentially just a boilerplate answer to the questions.
They don't cite previous papers? They don't cite the previous papers?
But they just they change it because there's the issue with the plagiarism that we talked about. Now, of course, even then, we do need some kind of accountability. So, we want the authors to write them themselves and so on. But that's almost like the answering questions to, let's say, USCIS, the visa application questions. Something like, are you planning to, conduct a terrorism in United States soil? The answer is always no. But they always ask something like that.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead, Douglas.
Jump in? Just, I agree there's too many papers, but it's other people write too many papers. my papers are obviously it's just the right number.
On the 1st of April.
The original question was how is research going to be different in the future, and the sort of facetious
What skills?
Yeah, but the facetious answer is I'm an old professor now. And my grad students do the research, right? So sure. That's just one level. It's not very different in some sense for me. But more seriously, I think this is the first meeting I've been to in which I was the oldest person in the room. And I know to a lot of the young people here, I seem really old, but I'm not. I'm not that old yet. So I think, this is a young person's dream because the old people are going to really struggle to keep up. So, this is clearly, machine learning in general is appealing to the younger generation much more, and the fraction of the older generation who are trying to get involved is smaller and smaller as they get older. So I think it's, it's the audience here's responsibility to figure this out because they're the ones learning how to do it. And not people like me, right? It's sort of shocking to be the oldest person in the room, but maybe wouldn't be true if I was in Paris. I don't know.
We didn't give any talks to people over a certain age, right, Karima? Ben has a comment.
So I think related to this point that was made earlier, and for example to the teaching, and one possible solution to the teaching problem of having plagiarism or cheating using large language models is just to make the assignments much harder. Basically anything that a large language model can produce is now no longer relevant as a question. As the homework problem. Just like maybe I don't know what it was like to learn math 100 years ago, but probably it involved a lot of mental calculation, and as far as I know, now it really doesn't that much anymore. And so maybe maybe some of the concerns actually derive from a worry about maintaining the status quo at some level, but actually maybe a positive view of this is that by having these tools that can deal with a lot of the, let's say, more rote work, or the less challenging work, just frees us up to do much more interesting things. So maybe if you're setting your students a question that can effectively be cheated on by large language models, then you're just not challenging them enough.
That's true, but
I agree with that, but it's going to be hard to keep up because they're clearly going to continue to get better, and right. Yeah.
But it being hard is not really. That's not really a good reason not to do it.
We have a reaction.
So just a current example was that in one of these discussions in my university, somebody from arts who's fully embraced ChatGPT in the course and was setting problems and stuff, and we said, well, how do you do it? How do you make sure? And he said, the students are either, I give them a prompt, and the students are either allowed to use ChatGPT to make a set of bullet points from the prompt, or to go from a set of bullet points to full text. And all of us went, but hold on a minute, there's nothing left. That's all the test, that's all there is. So if you allow one or either of those, the student's just going to do both, and then they're, so I do not know how to currently cope with that with homework. I don't know how to come up with a thing where you know that ChatGPT 5 isn't going to find it easy to do.
Yeah, and there's a comment on the back, but I can just say very quickly that my wife is a teacher of French modern lit, and of course you can imagine all of the books are inside ChatGPT. It's almost impossible. You can't give any homework exercises. The only way you can find out if the kids know their stuff is by doing an oral interview, and then who knows, maybe they'll have little tiny earphones in a few years' time. So is it Lisa Marie at the back? Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering, I mean, I wanted to ask if you think it could be an option to kind of have a regulated ChatGPT per, you know, that is regulated by the school or by the university at these different levels, where maybe, as Licia was saying, you know, it replaces the grammar check of the grant writing, but not doesn't touch the scientific part. And is that basically unrealistic because it's impossible to it's unrealistic?
That's what Marie-Laure said to me last night, that the kids should not have ChatGPT if they're under 18. I don't know what other people think about regulating these kinds of tools in school. Sorry, take the microphone.
Sorry, I guess that it's impossible. It's like, you know, the claims for X, that you refrain the freedom of expression, freedom of use, freedom of individuals, etc., etc. I see it's very hard. It will be very hard to regulate.
But it's what Douglas said is, you know, we have all these uses of ChatGPT, but in school they're just using it to cheat.
Cheating has always existed in school.
Yeah, but it's gone much easier. Karima.
Yeah, there's another use which is not only in school but also for documentation, and we've seen that just before this discussion. Actually, yeah, I know that's the next topic, but it's also related to teaching actually, because when I'm very lazy, so I would find any way not to cheat but to go quickly through through the thing I have to read. And this is fantastic. It's going to summarize all the knowledge in a few nice sentences. The work you should do by yourself to remember things. And I know me, I would have used that. And I would have been biased in many ways. And this is going to happen as well for the next topic, I guess. So this is another thing, which is a big pitfall.
Okay, so there's a follow-up question in New York, and then maybe Torsten. Is that, Adrian, is that okay?
So we have 4 follow-ups. I guess let's see how many we can get through, starting with Peter.
Okay, yeah, please.
Let's bring this back to science. One of the things that I think is still underappreciated is one of the ways that science is done is by reasoning why we know something.
Yeah,
right now, I can't see this being doable with ChatGPT or another bot because it doesn't cite its sources. So we can't distinguish between, and don't learn how to distinguish, and hence there's a shift in skill set, between bullshit being generated because we can't track it back to its source.
Yes,
That's really different in the way that scientific papers are being written. You have to cite where something is coming from.
But there are large language models who do cite, so we have to be careful. Huh?
They're trying to cite.
Yeah.
No, they cite correctly. Oh, yeah.
So my suggestion, try the Bing chat. That actually gives you all the citations, the links and everything, right?
That is, I think, a big improvement. So there are aspects of this. Often, whether they are working as intended is still questionable. But yes, I think that's a key element. Is we need to be able, even if the text is generated. Like, let's say we summarize the papers that are being kind of in our field that we haven't been able to follow up on. We need to be able to understand where specific statements come from, whether they've been generated by a chatbot or not.
Yep.
Right, so if I may just say 2 things there. One is that in my view, anything that, let's say, 1% of the people in any room can do, I mean, they will probably be able to implement it or to make the language model do something similar. But then, so that's the one thing. So if you're saying that, okay, so here's a given snippet, trying to find all the relevant or all the papers that have actually mentioned some of these things, that's essentially what Google Scholar does in some sense, right? But in a much more intelligent way. And then this Bing chat has always been here ever since like December last year. So it's been almost a year. So it's not like anything new or something that needs to be re-implemented or done better. So that's one aspect. But then the second aspect is actually going slightly deeper, is that not just about, let's say, finding citations or whatnot, but more like, okay, are these language models operating in a way that is similar to how we operate or how we reason? or in a way that is desirable for us. And then there are actually a number of papers that are popping up during the past, let's say, few months, including my own, showing that these models are really relying a lot on what we would call, let's say, associational learning or the pattern matching. And then the pattern matching is great, and then that's actually one of the most powerful things that we know that works in the statistics and machine learning. If we have enough amount of the data that does exhibit all those patterns that are useful, but then that actually doesn't get us one step further. That is that, now does it actually use the information that was given to it in a way that actually we want it to use? And then often how we want these language models to do is this more of a causal, let's say, reasoning. So that is that if something, if we intervene or something else intervenes, the answer should correspondingly change. But recent papers show that that's not necessarily the case. Then that's the reason why a lot of people are not just relying on training language models on the static data, but they collect the data on the fly. So that's what they refer to as a reinforcement learning with the human feedback and whatnot. So in that sense, the answer is that it's definitely doable to the standard. That is, let's say, I don't know, like the 90% of us would be happy about. But to go further, we would need some kind of paradigm shift in how we build this kind of, let's say, algorithms and models.
Yes, so there's a comment from Torsten, if it's okay for you guys in New York.
We have a few more comments, whichever order you prefer.
Torsten.
Okay. There's also a big chance this language model will probably produce or allow for ways of publication in which the publication adapts to the knowledge level of the reader. So, right? So, have a GR book and then depending on
Explain GR to me as if I'm a 4-year-old.
yeah, exactly.
That's right. And explain Torsten's papers.
What did he say?
Yeah, we will see. No, there's a part which contributes to the bullshit, don't they? Yeah, that was my point. And well, that might be a question to Licia, because you're editor of a journal, right? One could think about implementing a publication way in which basically ChatGPT or other language model enhanced maybe seminal papers are presented so that even bachelor student could access them.
So it will require somebody to check that then it's done correctly. So if the author wants to submit it as additional supplementary material, but somebody would have to take responsibility for that simplification. Yeah. So it's very useful. I mean, in terms of also outreach, where you don't know how to explain something to a 4-year-old, then you get what a good one looks like. But looks like, again, it's a JPEG of what it should look like, and then you have to put something to make sure that it's actually exactly what you want.
Maybe not with the current version, but these things will get more solid, I believe, and at some point.
Yeah, so there was a comment from New York.
So I'm Grant Stevens from Bristol. So I come from it from the computer science perspective. And this goes back to the idea of everyone saying it's going to get better. But the idea is we're outputting so much from these language models that eventually they're going to dwarf the amount of information that was there that it was trained on. So you're just retraining as like GPT-5, etc. goes on. You're just training on the output of the previous model. Yeah. And so it may converge way quicker than anybody expects, and then it might just drop off.
Converge on what?
Can I just urge the computer scientists not to train on the...
Yeah, please don't train on the output of GPT-4.
Seems like an obvious solution. Right?
But you don't know. You don't know whether they were generated or not. So there are actually two actually really important points that has been made. One is one that connects with all those issues of the plagiarism, and then you have the JPEG, you have the analogy from the Ted Chiang and so on, is that as the model gets better, what is going to be generated, regardless of whether the content is bullshit or not, is going to look increasingly more like us, to the point that it's going to be impossible to distinguish using statistical tools. That's almost inevitable. So on the education side, if anybody actually comes to you, any kind of company comes to the university and they say that they can detect it, they're all just bullshitting you for the so that they can actually raise the 5 years worth of the revenue for the company until they pivot to another thing. And in fact, the NYU just went through something similar. We were actually testing out some of the solutions. And a few months ago, we got an email from the university, and I told them that it's not going to work. But university task force emailed everyone saying that, well, please do not rely on this. I was like, okay, it makes sense. So that's the one thing. Now, the second thing is that if the internet is flooded with this kind of, let's say, ChatGPT or the language model generated text, does it actually necessarily imply that all these language models are going to converge and then perhaps degrade from there on? Not necessarily so, because there is always intervention, a little bit of the signal that we add in when we decide what to actually put on out of all those things that are generated from the language model. So that's still the kind of, let's say, additional information that is actually very critical information that is added. And then second thing is that even if we have the same amount of the data over and over, depending on what kind of learning algorithm we make, and then what kind of, let's say, objective function you use, sometimes the repetition doesn't really change anything. So think of, since you said that you're a computer scientist, if you think about, let's say, perceptron or support vector machines, it actually doesn't matter how many examples you have more on the positive side or the negative side, because the optimal decision boundary doesn't change. It's actually invariant to the ratio between those two. So in that sense, I don't know, I feel like I don't think it's going to be that much of an issue.
Okay, I think we can summarize the results of the second discussion that basically the basic skill of doing science, as someone already said, is to attempt to validate and understand where your results from, explainability. So maybe the next question then we'd like to address is the impact of language models in large collaborations. I know for one, having going to a lot of telecons, I wish there would be a better way in which to transmit information in collaborations. And also it seems to be an obvious way in which to improve collaborations is to find new ways in which to explain what's in the data to people who are not inside the collaboration. I was very impressed, I think as almost everyone here was, with the output of Chat Gaia, which enables scientists who are not inside the collaboration to query the database and to get useful scientific results. I wonder if the panelists had some thoughts on this, maybe starting with Pierre, because he's the man.
There are a lot to do and to say. So, if we imagine pushing all the documentation of a given collaboration, large collaboration such Euclid, to any LLM, I mean, in order to find information, when you arrive, like me, I arrived in Euclid in 2019. The project was selected in 2011 by ESA, but people were working at IAP and back in 200. So it's a massive amount of documentation where indeed there are great tools, and ChatGPT is a really great tool to just ask, and in large collaboration we are generating tons and tons and tons of documents, so much that in the end we can't remember even that we generated this document. And so on this, when you arrive and to gain knowledge and to find information, it will be a game changer, clearly. I've been also a big fan of Chat Gaia. I tried once AstroQuery, and I understand that. And so clearly for Chat Gaia, that's fine, because it's public. A Chat Euclid on unreleased data, I will go back to my first point. I don't know what they are doing with the data. If it's unreleased, it's not to end up in OpenAI servers to have all Euclid catalogs 2 years before the community. But yeah, there will be possibilities around and to speed up data releases on documenting from the code what have been done, finding stuff to be analyzed and investigated in the catalogs. Not sure that we can go down to the data release documentation automatically.
I hope so.
I'm not sure. When Karim was saying, I would have been a big fan of something that summarized the document for me, I would not have been. I mean, if I don't read a document, to do myself the summary, I don't learn. But maybe I'm bad, but it's the way that I'm working. So I'm not sure that having something that creates the documentation for you, you will not go by and miss a part of the document, a piece of information, a piece of very interesting part in the data that is in the data release, just because you let ChatGPT do the work for you, and that it will grab 90% of what is interesting.
There was a very quick reaction from Karim just because he's in the audience and he's sitting in front of Pierre Casenove.
And actually spoke my name. So yeah, I would be lazy, and you'll have a lot of lazy people like me. And I know that people are not reading the manual. I mean, I'm reading some codes, I'm releasing codes, and people don't read the manual. And then I say, oh, you should read the manual. But I would not read the manual. So if I have any shortcut, I would use it. And people will do that. And I'm a bad person. But we're full of normal bad person. So we have to deal with that. It's difficult.
Yeah, using manuals and so on, I totally agree. Learning thanks to a summary done by ChatGPT, I'm not capable of doing this. It's just I need to have the full understanding to really to really get it and keep it.
But we are talking two slightly different
yeah,
things.
it's two different topics.
One thing, you use the large language model that has been trained on the whole internet. Another thing is you have your document and you create a chatbot, but which starts from that document, compresses it, it's an encoder, decodes it, and then tells it to you in natural language. That's a completely different
That's a different thing than creating a document based on some code. I'm wondering if there's some reactions from New York, from Douglas and Kyung.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear at some level this is just a new calculator or Grammarly or something, and we're just going to have to figure out how to use it. So certainly, you know, for Euclid, it's bound to be better at finding documents than the current system.
Everybody,
that's not to criticize people that are managing the system, but it's just a huge pile of documents that's very hard to search, and it sounds like exactly the sort of thing that it should be good for. But in terms of this scientific output, it may be that large collaborations, it's easier to have internal rules because there's people to check things over, which there isn't for a one-author paper or a three-author paper necessarily. So I mean, it ought to be that in a large collaboration you can use it as a tool, however it develops a year or two from now, when the 1,000 Euclid papers are going to come out. We could be using it as some sort of tool in the process, but with the with the confidence that it's all being checked over by human beings before it goes out. So I think maybe large collaborations are kind of easier, maybe.
Yeah, and I know that for a fact.
If I just add one.
Yeah, sorry, please go ahead.
Just one quick thing is that I don't think we actually ever need or do have the full understanding of any of the tools that we use. I can actually do the survey here. So has anybody actually read the manual on the ARM or the x86 instruction sets? And then do you know how they are actually, how any of the tools that you're using actually right now are actually running on your chips? Or how the IP protocols work, in particular IP version 6. I mean, 4 I know a bit, but version 6, absolutely no idea. Or how all those, I mean, I'm not even sure how this microphone works at the moment, but I have absolutely zero issue using this to talk with all of you and talk with the people in Paris as well. So I feel like it's just another level of the abstraction that we'll probably have to familiarize ourselves with.
That's a good point. I did read the history of ARM, and it's an amazing story.
Sure, yes.
Are there any?
We have a question in New York from
please
Simon.
go ahead. Please go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, Simon Pierre, Stony Brook. Just a bit provocative. Maybe we have to re-justify for what larger collaborations are actually useful and where you cannot compete by just query an open source data set and use ChatGPT for certain aspects or other language models. There may not be a need for large collaboration in that sense. So whenever I join a collaboration, I want to have a scientific justification and a sociological, an organizational justification for why it's useful or not. And so we just have to always reevaluate what is the right way of doing it. And maybe it is mostly generating that catalog of the very low-level data products where we need a big collaboration or the understanding of the details, or others maybe not. So I would not think of how can we preserve certain structure that we have, but ask it opposite, why is it needed or not?
Thank you very much. Is there some other comments from New York?
Yeah, we have a question.
Please go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, so I was interested in the previous question about the couple responses to do with convergence of the model on account of more and more sort of self-similar data being ingested. And I think it's relevant to this discussion as well because we're talking about degrees of abstraction becoming essential in a collaboration, for example, moving forward with these kinds of tools. What I'm wondering is about the sociological version of the convergence phenomenon, essentially. So as a result of the availability of these kinds of tools, the degrees of abstraction that are now possible, whether there will be fewer and fewer trainable contributions of the type that are useful for something like ChatGPT to ingest and become better at what it does. Like, are we heading for a situation where, very few people understand the details, like the essential details of the type of work that we're doing?
That's a difficult question.
Yeah.
But I agree. In some sense, that's already has been how science has been, working, right? Standing on the shoulders of the giants, kind of thing. Now, it turned out that in this case, this giant is growing so fast to the point that probably getting to the shoulder is becoming a bit of an issue. I guess that's what you're pointing out. And then this connects to the education and then teaching discussion we had is that So if there is this new level of the abstraction of the tool that we need to use, then what is the best way to make, let's say, make people go up to this shoulder of this gigantic, let's say, giant? And then that one is probably the one that we have to think most because that's the most difficult question, rather than no offense, but think about how to prevent students from cheating. And if everyone is cheating, that just means that you are just not teaching them correctly. So I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. Are there any other comments from Paris? There's one at the back.
I have a question more related to the psychological aspect of using ChatGPT, on scientists, but also on students, because I've seen with the student of programming courses that if they have already used ChatGPT, they are more prone to seeking for instruction instead of open problem to solve. When you ask them to do a code for a big problem, they want that you write a simple instruction. And every semester is simpler than the one before the request because it seems that they cannot make abstract judgment. They cannot abstractify the problem. And so I was wondering if also scientists in the future, then they can lose our ability to solve complex tasks because they will get more used to have summarized text of other researcher, and also maybe we can collectively lose our ability to communicate with others because we rely on software to change our text in a way that is more interpretable, more explainable for others. So we don't put ourselves in the mind of others. So we can lose our ability to oral communicate what is our expertise.
I think we have to teach students how to interact with large language models. So that has to be part of what universities start to do. But it would be really sad if the best scientists are the ones that can write the best prompts for ChatGPT, and that's all there is, right? So that would be sad. So hopefully we're not going there, but I think we need to figure out how to use these tools well, which nobody really knows yet because it's so new. The research hasn't really fully been done. Right?
One follow-up in New York.
Yes.
I have a question. This is Tony from Toronto. My question is considering cybersecurity. So do these surveys with the UK, is there any interest in how to protect this data from possibly leaking to public access? So if there's something like ChatGPT, there wouldn't be that access for the data to be accessible for large language model prior to the publication from that survey?
You think somebody's going to insert W of minus 1.058?
Yeah.
And David, yeah.
This is actually it's a valid concern, not from the astronomy, but for instance, I spent my time at Genentech, which is which is part of the Roche, which is the second largest pharmaceutical in the world. And then when it comes to pharma, it's all about intellectual properties and how to protect the, let's say, investment they're making into this kind of molecular design and then all those clinical trials and so on. Then there's a patient information as well. So this kind of security issue is a big thing. So initially, as soon as the ChatGPT was released, the first thing that the Roche did was to actually block access to ChatGPT from the entire Roche network. And then there are more than 120, let's say, 1,000 employees at Roche, and then none of them had access to the ChatGPT from their own laptop because they couldn't actually tell what OpenAI is going to do and then what kind of, let's say, security, let's say, infrastructures they have built there as well. So of course, OpenAI always makes a promise, that's fine. But as we saw 2 weeks ago, the OpenAI could, let's say, evaporate over a weekend. That was clear, right? So then what is the right way to ensure that using these tools are good, but then what is the right way to kind of, let's say, put some kind of compliances and regulations on these companies is going to be a major thing that will have to be done. And in fact, part of the executive order that was announced just a couple of weeks ago from the US about White House about the, let's say, AI in, all across the society does actually touch a lot on this aspect of the security, in particular cybersecurity.
We have a follow-up from Mr. Chatgaya himself.
Hi, Nolan, University of Toronto. So as for intellectual property, I think it is absolutely technically feasible to make a chatbot for your own documentation for Euclid or whatever, because there's open source models, one of them like Llama 70B, that you can host on your own servers. And there's so many open source alternatives to ChatGPT that let it Llama search through all your PDFs, read all the information, provide you an answer, and cite exactly what PDF and what section in the PDF they got it from. So I really don't see any problem with intellectual property or technical aspects that could hold back Chat Euclid for the documentation.
So perhaps
can I just bring in Pierre Casenove? Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, and here you're reaching a bit the limits of the large consortium and large collaboration where you end up in political decision and discussion on who shall provide this, who shall host it, who is the manpower, and in the end, the people will use ChatGPT because it's easier and so on, and that nobody provide this. Where on smaller collaboration, maybe it's easier to just move forward and say, we need it, we put it in place. And in large collaboration, you always have a bit of latency to have something decided, put in place, and so on. And because saying that we put something in place is also a cost on the long term. You need to manage it, administer it, update it, keep it up to date, and so on. So it has a cost, and so it has drawbacks on also. And so sometimes you can have latency, but I agree with you. I'm totally in favor of having open source models being instantiated and hosted locally, shared among a collaboration. As I was saying, the documentation for Euclid is among us. Each time we ask, we do find someone that knows the documentation that has the answer.
Yeah.
But you have to ask a lot. And such tool would be great. Really great, and game changer in many aspects. Over a development of 10 years, you have many changes in people, and you lose knowledge each time. And so clearly, when you have a commissioning phase, when you just launch your satellite and you have some surprises in your instruments, it takes time to go back to the document and find back that indeed in 2015 we did see the same behavior, and such tool would clearly be an answer to this.
There's a very quick reaction from Karim. And then maybe a quick reaction from New York, and we'll go on.
A quick one again, yes, it would be fantastic, and someone will do it, which will be a problem, because someone will do it on the side, and then you'll have to make sure that it works for the decades to come. But then there's an issue, which is versioning. We need versioning, so we need to understand what's a version, and, well, for spending ages in LiveLink, finding the right version, making sure it's the right version. So making sure that this oracle will give you the correct answer for a given version, that's daunting. You really need to know how it works. Otherwise, how can you be sure?
Okay, so is there a quick reaction from New York, and then we'll go on to the last topic? Yeah, so Licia tells me that she wants to be provocative, but maybe I could ask my question. We're into the last 20 minutes now. What will be the future of research with large language models? I mean, most of the stuff we've been talking about so far has been pretty pedestrian. I mean, it's amazing time savers. Just think if someone had explained, 15 or 20 years, you could translate instantaneously between any language, summarize any document. Those are all game changers in terms of making research easier, but is actually going to make new research. What about citizen science? Could imagine that the general public could do research on data sets using tools like ChatGPT. What's the future, Licia?
So let me try to be provocative first and then go back to your actual question. So I'm going to say a few things and then I'm going to tell you what they have in common, and I think they have in common with what we're discussing right now. Harvard computers. Before the invention of the computer, they were ladies who were actually doing the calculations.
Here at the observatory.
Yeah. The washing machine, Google Maps, and in general, the portable computer, the laptop. So every time something like this was introduced, has changed our system of values, what kind of skill we value and what kind of skill we don't value. And so the advent of this large language model, in some way, it's going to change a little bit our system of value and what kind of skills and ability we value and what kind we don't. And it's going to change also the way, therefore, we educate and we teach, because it's just a change in your value system. So this goes with the point that Ben was saying. The way to teach mathematics has changed with the invention of the pocket calculator and with the invention of the portable computer. I'm old enough to remember that when I was doing my first undergraduate lab, we were forbidden from using computers to plot the graph. We had to do it by hand in the piece of paper, because the concept was that otherwise you don't learn to make graph. I think we moved on from that. I
did this during my internship at Arma Observatory a long time ago.
I believe that the new generation didn't go through this pain and actually does the graph in a computer. But so what system of value is going to change? What are we going to value more and what are we going to value less? And how we are going to inbuild that into the education? That's the provocative question.
Okay, who would like to respond? Karim.
Well,
sorry.
Over there, yeah.
Nabila, yeah, sorry. I'm looking at these guys because they're looking at me.
Yeah. There's a bias here. No, so we were chatting together with Louise, and we were wondering. So in schools, at elementary schools, they still learn how to draw graphs on a piece of paper.
Really?
And yes, they do. Well, at least in France. And I think it is a different way of learning, and maybe so. Louisa was asking whether
should we stop writing?
Yeah, it's another.
Write by hand, right? We can.
Yeah.
Are we going to change?
We're not going
to.
Take the microphone. Take the microphone if you have a comment.
Okay. Are we going to change from a written civilization back to an oral civilization? Maybe, I don't know. But one thing for sure is that I think that we need definitely to involve neurosciences or people who really, study the way we learn and the way it's better to learn. Because I'm not completely sure that, that we need to give up some of the ways of communicating and some of the ways of learning. But I don't know. I'm not a neuroscientist, and I think I would be much more comfortable to hear their
could have
a
reaction from the panel in New York, yes. Go ahead, Doug.
I don't know what's going to happen, but it's clear that things are going to change a lot. So, what do I do for a living? Mostly I edit papers. So, if editing papers stops being a thing, then I have to take up knitting or something. occupy my time. And then, what are the other things I do? I write joke papers. I haven't seen a good April Fool paper generated by ChatGPT yet, but it's presumably coming.
In a parrot voice.
So we'll see whether it can actually generate something that's funny in a new way. That would be interesting. And then, eventually we're going to have to be trying to figure out whether, is it genuinely artificial intelligence? So can you genuinely take a bunch of ideas and make new ideas? So it's not there yet, but that's the goal of people who think it's AI.
Yep.
So just to give you, the counter example, I took over lecturing some course recently, and I had material for the previous lecturer. And he had an LCR circuit. And I thought, hold on a minute, I'm sure I call that an LRC circuit. Is it LCR or LRC? What's the normal? So I Google, and Google jumps me to something that jumped me to basically a large language model, because it must not have been asked before or something. And the large language model said, an LRC circuit and an LCR circuit are different. An LRC circuit is a combination of an inductor, a resistor, and a capacitor, whereas, so you can fill in the blank. So not artificial intelligence, right? But if that changes and it can clearly generate somehow new knowledge by putting all the ideas together, then we're really going to have to figure out how that interfaces with science. And as I said, I think it's the job of everybody else in the room except me, because it's the young generation that are going to have to sort this out.
I'd just like to ask Kyunghyun, our computer science expert, then, do you think large language models will ever be able to generate new knowledge?
As Doug said, actually, that is the goal, right? So at the end of the day, using any of these language models or the AI technology or the machine learning technologies to speed up what we already know how to solve, or at least 10% of the people in the room can solve, I think that's like a very low bar, and I'm pretty sure that's going to just happen, even without this kind of advances in machine learning. But the goal of machine learning, or computer science in general, has always been to figure out a machine that's going to solve a problem for which we have absolutely no idea. And then one of them is like the hypothesis generation, literally. So we want these models to be able to show us the molecules that we never even imagined that's going to actually allow us to build the therapeutics to solve a disease that we never even imagined. In the case of the astronomy, I guess, maybe language model is going to give us a completely different, let's say, set of the laws that turned out to be much better at making predictions in the future about all those phenomena that we see in the universe. So that's absolutely the goal that we want. But one thing for sure is that it's kind of associational or the correlational, let's say, learning clearly has a limitation. And then what that limitation tells us is that it will require these models that are built up on top of the correlation learning a lot of input from us. We'll have to tell them what is the right, let's say, correlation, and what are the incorrect correlations. Then what are the actual causal things. Then what is the right way to experiment with them, and then we'll have to run the experiments for them in order to disambiguate it. So in that sense, we're getting there, but there are some obvious hurdles that are like right in front of us that we are actually not talking about them much, just because ChatGPT is just so fascinating to play around with. And April Fool jokes, I think that is already writing them, right?
Yeah, I'll just come back very quickly. I mean, if you listen to what people like Gary Marcus say, they say that essentially because there's no symbolic information, no reasoning inside ChatGPT, there's a limit on the amount of new information because it's essentially the stochastic parrot. So do you think the large language model architecture can actually produce new knowledge, or we'll have to change it?
So the network architecture, absolutely true. And then even the symbolic approaches, like what Gary has been advocating for many years, many decades, without making any progress so far. But anyway, okay, that aside. So symbolic, let's say, machines does not necessarily imply that those machines are going to be able to produce anything new. That's not it. So how we build matters. How we train these models matters. And in fact, a lot of the one misconception that is out there is that the discrete, let's say, concepts requires a discrete, let's say, representation. But that's absolutely not true. And then in fact, the computers that we use are the representative example of how we can use the continuous representation to encode the discrete concepts, and how we are actually encoding the continuous concept using the discrete concept, let's say, representation. So all those things, all this, the neural net that uses continuous representations can absolutely encode the discrete concepts. And it's more like, what is the right way to set those weight values? And then what is the learning algorithm that we are going to use? And then the current one absolutely has some limitations that needs to be overcome. We don't know how to overcome them yet, though. It's definitely not Gary who's going to overcome it, though, I gotta say.
Okay, thanks. I think Ben wanted to make a comment still. Oh, okay. Oh, sorry, sorry. Agnes has got the microphone, so she has priority.
Okay. 2 comments. So one, following up on Licia's points, I just want to send a signal that a few years ago, even before ChatGPT was there were already people thinking of app to just share plots instead, because maybe that's actually what we just need to convey information. And actually, we're less stressed about machine learning to produce fake plots, because I think we would kind of maybe notice that better. And maybe that's a sign that the publication, I mean, we know the publication industry is in kind of like a crisis. So I agree it's a good time to try to rethink this. And all the idea of like publishing to get jobs and everything. And my second point was to Nabila's point. If you don't want ChatGPT to create something in your style, then yes, you don't need to write anything. But if you want to, have your own style, your own thing, people will naturally continue doing what we do now. I mean, we already see that in arts.
Okay. Yeah. Ben?
So, I mean, there's an example of technology, unfortunately, not really solving a problem like that. So, information systems have been used to make all kinds of administrative processes much, much more efficient. But has the time people spend on administrative processes actually gone down? Probably not. It just makes it also a lot cheaper to add more administrative processes and make, so there seems to be conservation law there. And I think some of those tools might make certain kinds of work much easier, and just, I don't think it is, I strongly believe that we will not stop writing. We'll probably use these tools to write a lot more.
A lot more stuff.
And
yeah,
maybe a lot more things. So maybe one rule for when you're allowed to use ChatGPT without much editing is if it's actually for a useless task.
Exactly, yeah. If you can do it by ChatGPT, then. Okay, so a short comment from Helena, very, very quickly. Let's try to finish up.
I was thinking that right now we can consider ChatGPT as an assistant. In the case it was able to generate knowledge, we could think about it as our collaborator, but the best collaborator who would always like to work on our project,
yeah,
and had infinite
always
time.
Always motivated, even at 1 o'clock in the morning, yeah. Karim, a quick comment.
A very quick one, just taking the bait from Licia. You're asking what are going to be the values in 15 years, and I kind of know it. I mean, that's why we're here. I mean, this is not replaceable by ChatGPT or large language model, or yes, then I hope. And we are striving to put a bridge between us and to communicate, and we're using technology for that. So I think it's perhaps going to be used this way, because we still value, well, exchanging with each other, sometimes grinding with each other. That's the way new idea emerges, in my view.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. So, New York, would you like to make a comment on the panelists, or I'm sure Douglas has something to say still.
It's lunchtime. I don't have any wise remarks left.
Okay. Okay. Are there any questions?
I didn't have any in the first place.
Are there any comments from the audience in New York?
Seems like not, but oh yeah, we just go on. Mike.
Hi, I just wanted to maybe build on that last comment about imagining how things could look. I think a lot of the panels focused on how things will change and less on how things should change. And I wonder if we talked about teaching, the point of teaching is for students to learn, and they're just cheating. The fundamental problem is not LLMs. If we're trying to do research, and the aim is, like Peter says, to do some reasoning, but half of our papers are full of bullshit, you know, the problem is not a difficulty in summarizing them, it's a problem in the system. So I guess my closing question to the panel is, if you could imagine rebuilding completely the system of research with LLMs in mind, is there a change you'd make?
I think that's not something we can answer in the 5 minutes, or if we did, Paco would be quite unhappy. Should we just leave that, or unless someone has got a 30-second reaction?
Less papers?
Less papers, yeah. More jobs, someone says in the back. Unfortunately, I think we're at the end. I think it was a very interesting debate, and it was great to have everyone's comments. And this is the last debate of the conference, but I hope it's not going to be the last conference. So thank you, everybody, for the very insightful comments, and thank you, the panelists, for making it a very interesting, even more interesting than I expected to be. So thanks, everybody.